Hey everyone and welcome. Today we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, Dynamic Apex. It's honestly one of the most powerful concepts in a Salesforce developer's toolkit. And it's the real secret to writing code that isn't just strong but seriously flexible and future-proof. All right, let's dive in. So, let me just start by posing a question. What would you do if you had to build something today that has to work with custom objects or fields that your users might not even create for another 6 months? I mean, how is that even possible? How can your code know about things that literally don't exist yet? Well, that is the exact problem that Dynamic Apex was built to solve.
You know, to really appreciate just how cool the solution is, we've got to take a second to understand the problem. And that problem is rooted in the way we usually write Apex code, which is what we call static.
Okay, think of your standard, static Apex, like a perfectly cut key for one very specific lock. It works great. It's super fast, it's efficient, it's really secure because Salesforce knows exactly what object, like an account or a contact, and which fields you're touching when you save your code. But here's the catch. That key only works for that one lock. The moment a new lock shows up, say a new custom object, your key is totally useless. You have to go all the way back to the workshop and forge a brand new one. That rigidity, that's the real pain point. And this is where Dynamic Apex comes in and just changes the game completely. If static Apex is that single, purpose-built key, then Dynamic Apex, well, that's the master key. It's the tool that can walk up to any lock it finds and figure out how to open it, right then and there.
This slide right here just nails the difference. Over on the left, with static Apex, everything is known when you hit save. That's compile time. But with Dynamic Apex on the right, the code figures things out while it's actually running, at runtime. And it pulls this off by using generic things like the S-object type instead of specific ones like account. And that right there is the secret sauce to its incredible flexibility.
So here's the bottom line. Dynamic Apex is all about putting off decisions until the last possible second. Instead of writing code that says, okay, do this specific thing to this account record, you like code that asks, all right, what kind of record am I even looking at right now? And what fields does it have? It literally discovers the shape of the data as it runs. So how do we actually do all this cool stuff? Well, we've got a toolkit with 3 main pieces. First up is Dynamic SOQL, which lets us build our database queries as simple text strings on the fly. Second, we have Dynamic DML, which lets us insert or update records without needing to know their specific type beforehand. And then the real powerhouse, Schema Describe Methods. This lets our code literally ask Salesforce, hey, tell me about this object. What are its fields? What are their data types? These are the tools we're going to use to build our master key.
All right, enough theory. Let's make this real. For our first use case, we're going to build a generic cloning tool. This is a classic example of where Dynamic Apex just absolutely shines. So picture this. Your admin wants a single, simple component where a user can pick any object in the org, account, opportunity, you name it, even a custom object made yesterday, choose a record, check a few boxes for the fields they want to copy, and just click clone. You can't build that with static code. It's impossible.
So here's the recipe. First, we use a schema method to get a list of all the objects the user can see and pop that into a dropdown. Easy enough. Once the user picks one, step 2, we use another schema method to get all the fields for that specific object. Then, for step 3, we use Dynamic SOQL to build a query string based on only the fields the user selected. After that, we dynamically create a new record of that type and then use these super handy generic methods called get and put to copy the values over. And finally, step 6, we use Dynamic DML to insert the new record. It's a 6-step process that works for literally any object.
Okay, that was pretty cool, right? But that same dynamic thinking can be used for way more than just user tools. Let's kick it up a notch with our second use case, building a super flexible integration service.
Think about this. You're getting data from some external system. Today, that data needs to be mapped to the contact object. Fine. But tomorrow, a whole new data feed comes in, and it needs to map to a new custom object called vendor. With the old static approach, every single change means a developer has to get involved, write new code, and do a deployment. But what if we could make the code smart enough to adapt all on its own?
So here, the real magic happens in step 2. Instead of hard coding our field mappings into our Apex class, we store them in custom metadata. Our Apex code gets the data, then it queries that metadata to ask, okay, where does this stuff go? And from there, it just uses the same dynamic tricks we saw before. Dynamically create an S-object, use the put method to map the values, and then do a dynamic upsert. The result? The code never changes. Only the metadata configuration does. How cool is that? So, look, by getting the hang of these techniques, you're not just learning another coding pattern. You're really gaining a new superpower, the ability to build solutions that are truly, genuinely adaptable.
This quote just says it all, doesn't it? Adapt to different objects and fields without code deployments. That is the whole point. That's the business value. It's all about being agile and removing the friction between what the business needs and what the technology can deliver, because the flexibility is baked right in from the very beginning.
So why does all this matter so much? Because it completely changes how you think about building on the Salesforce platform. You stop writing these single-purpose, one-off solutions, and you start creating flexible frameworks. It's the difference between building a single hammer and building a whole toolbox.
So if you're going to remember anything, remember this. Dynamic Apex lets you future-proof your code so it doesn't just crumble the second someone adds a new field. It empowers your admins to make changes themselves, which they will absolutely love you for. This, of course, slashes your long-term maintenance costs, and it lets you build these amazing, scalable, reusable tools that provide value across your entire org.
We've seen how Dynamic Apex is like having a master key, one that unlocks the ability to create code that can adapt, evolve, and grow with the business. So the only question left is, now that you have this key in your hand, what are you going to build with it?